Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. Today's flight is piloted by Randy Wright, who is joined by his first officer Jeremy Grapington. We know you have a choice when it comes to your radio listening pleasure, and would like to thank you for choosing to fly with the Wright Flyer. Ground traffic control has moved us to the departure lane, so please be seated, fasten your seatbelts, and ensure that all tray tables are stowed in the upright and locked position. We will be taking off shortly, and once again, we'd like to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show as we soar above the friendly airwaves in comfort and style.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Flyer. This is your captain speaking, and I'd like to take this opportunity to personally welcome you to our state-of-the-art radio program. We know you have a choice when it comes to your radio listening pleasure, and would like to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. What's more, we are confident that no other radio program or venue will fly you over the friendly airwave in as much comfort and style, nor leave you with an indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment, quite like we can here at the Wright Flyer. Now that you're aboard, please be seated, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show. We've taxied to the departure lane and are awaiting takeoff clearance from air traffic control. While they go through that mindless, bureaucratic red tape and regimentation, my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, and I shall delve into the pre-flight checklist because there is a lot of news and information to get to before we may indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, what we see unfurling with respect to the Planned Parenthood clinic shooting in Colorado goes to prove what Jeremy and I have been repeating on past episodes of the Wright Flyer. No matter what type of background check or other encroachment upon the fundamental and unalienable right of the people to keep and bear firearms, none of these radical left-wing policies will prevent those who are hell-bent on causing mayhem and destruction from carrying out their twisted machinations. In this case, some 3 individuals, including a University of Colorado at Colorado Springs police officer, have been killed, and 9 individuals have been injured or wounded, including 5 police officers. It has been reported by the Associated Press that all 9 of the injured people are in good condition at local hospitals. Now, of course, this coming in the wake of terror concerns around the country, which has shifted the main impetus of the 2016 presidential campaign to foreign policy, raises some interesting questions which need to be addressed. Ever since President Obama claimed that the Paris massacre, the worst attack on French soil since the Second World War, was a mere setback with respect to the Islamo-fascist terrorist group ISIS, there have been claims by officials close to the Obama regime that domestic terrorists engaging in gun violence present the greatest threat to national security presently. There's something off about this entire story. The suspect has been identified as Robert Louis Deere. Apparently, Mr. Deere lives the life of a loner and keeps to himself. There have been reports that he claimed that he carried out the Planned Parenthood attack because of his staunch opposition to abortion and to send a message that there would be no more body parts of babies up for purchase. However, his closest neighbor, James Russell, said that the topics of religion and abortion never came up in conversation. So why is it, when the tide is starting to turn against the Democrats with respect to the national discourse over terrorism, that a man specifically targets a Planned Parenthood clinic, and that all of the staff working at said facility come out of the incident completely unscathed? Jeremy, you know that I am not one to believe in conspiracy theories, but I do find that this is a bit too coincidental for my taste. All of the political check marks for the radical extremist left-wing agenda have been checked in this case, and it appears to make the regime's message for the greatest terror threat in the United States to be true. Nevertheless, despite his claim that this is the greatest terror threat to face the American people, President Obama is flying to Paris to attend a summit not on the growing threat of Islamo-fascist terrorism, but the hoax of man-made global warming. Again, it seems odd to me, or somehow out of place. Why would this man not have mentioned this in a rambling manifesto, as the other sociopaths who have committed mass shootings of this nature have? It doesn't seem to fit the suspect pattern whatsoever. The only thing that it seems to fit is the agenda and talking points of the current regime, and that concerns me quite a bit.
Well, you know how much I like to dig, and earlier you and I were on having a phone conversation, and both of us were doing research on this Deer guy, Robert Louis Deer, and we, according to the reports that we had, looking at his last known residencies being in the Carolinas, so we both checked the offender search in both North and South Carolina. We checked the offender search in Colorado, and nothing came up under his name. Now, there was reports saying that he had a criminal history, a criminal background. My thing is, why are they focusing on that or mentioning that when we had other incidents like Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, this individual that shot former co-workers of his in Virginia, and any other sociopaths? Why weren't their criminal backgrounds mentioned or even brought up? Even though they probably had them, we know for sure Michael Brown did. Trayvon Martin definitely had a criminal record, even though it was juvenile, was sealed, but we still know that it existed. This man was accused of things and charged in a couple of incidents, but was never fully prosecuted or found guilty or convicted of anything. But they find it fit to put that out there as to label him, again, with the labeling. Some reports said that he was a backwoods type individual, which many Americans would take offense to that. And you and I both are not politically correct. If someone wanted to call me backwoods, I'd just smile and say thank you, and then give them 30 seconds to get off my property. But that's me. But it comes down to the labeling. They're always wanting to find things where they can attach some kind of label. This is all part of the propaganda. It's a very key point of propaganda mentioned with Joseph Goebbels. The principles of propaganda. Labeling has to be done in order to achieve the effectiveness of the propaganda. They want to try and say that he had a domestic violence history where there was only one occasion where charges weren't even pressed. Animal cruelty, and now there's even conflicting reports that I've seen that his whole intention wasn't even to be at the Planned Parenthood. It was, I guess there was a bank next door that he was planning on robbing, and when the police showed up or the alarms went off, he fled to the Planned Parenthood facility to make a standoff. So the problem is there's a lot of conjecture out there. We don't know all the facts. The warrants have been sealed in this case. They don't even know what the motive is. They're not even divulging what type of firearm he used. However, in other cases, they want to label military-type assault weapons used in different shootings, like with Newtown and Adam Lanza. Everybody jumped right to the whole AR assault weapons, which a lot of leftists and individuals that don't understand what AR stands for, they think it stands for assault rifle, and that's simply not the case. It actually stands for the name of a manufacturer that developed it, that platform. So with all this labeling and everything and all this conjecture, the man wasn't even arraigned for a hearing yet. That was supposed to happen today, and he was already put in front of the court of public opinion, much like George Zimmerman was, and Officer Wilson, Darren Wilson, and officers in New York City with regard to Eric Gardner. This has to stop. It's nothing but propaganda perpetuance that is is driving this country into the ground. They have an agenda, and personally, I don't think it has anything to do with staving off terrorism or anything like that. I think this has something to do to further push the national healthcare issue, because there were several reports that you and I both read that mentioned healthcare numerous times, especially with what's her name, Cowart, the individual in charge of the Planned Parenthood facility there, mentioned it. Healthcare. He's depriving people of free and necessary healthcare, so on and so forth. That's nothing but more propaganda and labeling it to further this agenda.
And you know what they do is they have come out and they are basing this entirely off of unconfirmed reports. You know, apparently what he was saying with respect to no more baby parts or baby body parts was just made on a condition of anonymity from a law enforcement official who really didn't have permission to come out and speak on this topic at all. And therefore, once again, everything that is coming out in the media is unsubstantiated, uncorroborated. It's just a bunch of wild-eyed, idle speculation. And like you said, it should be sending alarm bells to each and every decent American citizen, because when you stop and think about it, his fundamental and unalienable right to an presumption of innocence until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in front of a jury of his peers has been denied to him, because everybody's going to have heard of this case. The way that the mainstream media has been running around like a chicken with its head cut off to try and spread as much speculation about this as they could just once again shows that we are facing the same type of yellow journalism that pushed the United States into things like the Spanish-American War when William Randolph Hearst controlled everything and was pushing an agenda for the government. Basically, the media is sitting in the back pocket of this current regime, and they will do any and everything that the regime commands of them, and that is what we are facing in the country right now. Folks, again, the solutions to these problems which have presented themselves can be found within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. The Second Amendment was included within the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution, or the Bill of Rights, for the purpose of providing a safeguard to the American people. This safeguard is against not only an oppressive and tyrannical government, but also from any threat to our other fundamental and unalienable rights, which includes the right to life. We can be diametrically opposed to the purpose of Planned Parenthood, but we do not possess the rights to take away the fundamental and unalienable right to life of other citizens. As Jeremy and I have frequently reiterated on past episodes of the Wright Flyer, our rights end where another's begins. And apparently, even if we are to take the mainstream media's claim for motivation of this shooting at face value, Robert Deere's actions show that he was out to infringe upon the rights of others without going through the necessary and proper channels of our justice system. In response to this shooting, which fortunately has resulted in little loss of life, President Obama has once again raised the specter of operating outside the scope and boundaries of the United States Constitution in order to encroach upon the fundamental and unalienable rights of the citizenry to keep and bear firearms. It seems hypocritical in a time when Islamo-fascist terrorists were able to carry out the worst attacks on French soil since World War II due to France's insane anti-gun policies, that the president would be instructing the people to be calm, yet also claiming that our ability to keep and bear firearms creates greater opportunities for terrorism. Again, he erroneously points to so-called homegrown terrorists and claims that they present the greatest threat to America's safety. Again, I find this all just a bit too convenient to be true. In order to get to the truth of this all, and we do have to stop and think about it, you have to take a closer look at the man himself, Robert Deere himself. According to Pete Williams at NBC, Robert Deere is a North Carolina native who lives the life of a loner. Apparently, his cabin in North Carolina did not even have electricity or running water. Neighbors from that region said that he was a strange man, but they never believed that he would do anything wrong. What's more, there's nothing in his criminal background that would have prevented Deere from purchasing what they were claiming, at least at NBC, was an AK-47. Again, we don't actually know what it was that he was using, and so this is what they're trying to go for. Again, to say that, look, the background checks are not strenuous enough, we aren't doing enough to, quote-unquote, prevent these terrorists from carrying out these actions. But again, is this the same thing as, say, a 9/11, or what those Islamo-fascists did in Paris just 2 weeks ago? Again, I believe that the answer is an unequivocal no. And I think that you would agree with me on that, Jeremy.
Well, the thing is, Obama opened up his mouth. And this is a quote directly from him. He says, and I quote, "This is not normal. We can't let it become normal. If we truly care about this, if we're going to offer up our thoughts and prayers again, for God knows how many times with a truly clean conscience, then we have to do something about the easy accessibility of weapons of war on our streets to people who have no business wielding them. Period. Enough is enough." End quote. There's a problem with that whole statement. Number one, these are not weapons of war, okay? Handguns, rifles, shotguns, semi-automatic weapons, are they used in scenarios dealing with being on a battlefield? Absolutely. But that's like saying, Taco Bell is responsible for the franchise wars happening between McDonald's and Burger King. There's nothing there that makes any sense. It can't make any sense at all. Firearms are firearms. They want to, again, label them as weapons of war to invoke some sort of sensible fear. It would actually be irrational fear, but in order to further this agenda. Now, the other issue I have with this is easy accessibility of weapons of war. Okay? Geraldo is right in line, towing the mark with Obama on this, because Geraldo says we have to have national background checks on this. People shouldn't be able to just go out and be able to purchase a weapon. They should be able to own 13 firearms.
Oh, really? Well, you'll be glad to know this. This just in, Geraldo got fired from his ABC radio show spot, so maybe he wants to reconsider his background checks.
Yeah, and the thing is, Geraldo is a self-proclaimed member of the NRA. Geraldo is a hypocrite. He's a liar. He's a fraud. And getting fired from ABC, well, it's about time they do something right. That man needs to be, and I use the term man very loosely, he needs to be stripped of any credentials whatsoever of being able to report any kind of news. Period. That's all that has to be done with that. But he goes on to say that individuals that have, what's a person need 13 firearms for? Because they can, because it is their right, because nothing prohibits them from owning them. How many cars does Geraldo have? How many pairs of clothes does he have? How many pairs of shoes? I think if he wants to limit our accessibility of firearms, we need to limit his accessibility of clothing. On second thought, that'd probably be a bad idea because more selfies of him shirtless would probably surface.
And that was part of the reason why he was fired, too. I have to point out that Mr. Williams engaged in the typical mainstream media game of semantics. He made sure to include the phrase, quote, high-powered, close quote, when describing the firearm that was allegedly used to carry out this attack. And again, this is just the media speculating. So they were trying to say that it was an AK-47. Well, an AK-47 fires the Russian equivalent to a .30 caliber round in the United States. That's your typical hunting round. You know, they try and say, oh, look, it's high powered. Well, there's nothing really all that magically high powered about that. Again, this is a clear demonstration of the mainstream media's attempt to vilify an inanimate object and strike at the people's fundamental right to keep and bear firearms. Now, yes, a .30 caliber is more powerful than a .22. A .30 caliber makes a good sniper round. That said, it's not as though it's like a .50 cal, which again is a much more powerful round. That would, to me, would be a quote-unquote high-powered. But again, it just goes to show how there's a lot of semantics with this. And it's how the media used to also try and play the games with claiming that an autoloader was fully automatic. Yeah, that was real cute. But again, it's this intellectually disingenuous aspect of the media. You know, another thing is law enforcement officials, according to Williams, who we've already shown has an agenda here, were the ones that released a statement that after being captured, Deere spoke that, of the recent videos which have come to the surface showing that Planned Parenthood officials have been engaging in, how shall we say this, rather dubious activities of trying to sell fetal body parts. Of course, they're trying to now say that it was lies and all of that. In fact, it should be noted that the law enforcement personnel have stressed that the motives behind Friday's shootings remain unclear. They stated that Deere rambled about a great many unrelated topics. Nevertheless, Williams thought that the abortion narrative was enough to push through the case. In other words, they're trying to paint him as some ultra-white right-wing extremist who cannot stand the fact that there are abortion clinics operating in the country. Yet again, law enforcement officials have stressed that this was but one of many unrelated things that Deere said after being taken into custody. I would say that this was an attempt by the mainstream media to generalize. It's funny, with respect to Islamo-fascist terrorists, they always stress that we shouldn't jump to conclusions. But with respect to any one of these shootings, they attempt to label it the work of a right-wing conspiracist or extremist as soon as the story lands on their desk. This is the sort of hypocrisy that we are facing with respect to the mainstream media. It is clear that they are not reporting the information in an objective fashion. Rather, they cannot seem to divorce themselves from their own radical and twisted agenda.
Here's the other thing. This report I have right in front of me now is from CNN. Okay, CNN of all places, go figure. The report begins. It says, "Who is Robert Louis Deere?" Okay. Prior to Hartzell, Deere appears to have spent much of his life in the Carolinas. Okay, he bought a piece of property about 65 miles west of the clinic in Hartzell. He paid about $6,000 according to this report. Zygmunt Post was a neighbor of Robert Louis Deere. It said one of the few interactions, now get this, one of the few interactions he had was when Deere brought him some anti-Obama pamphlets. Then Zygmunt Post is quoted as saying, that's about all I've run into him, end quote. Now, according to the article, few interactions, meaning more than one. Did he bring him anti-Obama pamphlets on more than one occasion? We don't know. My question is, why is that even in the article? What does that have to do with the events that happened at the clinic? Well, absolutely nothing to a sane and logical person, but to someone who is perpetuating Joseph Goebbels' principles of propaganda, the anti-Obama pamphlets had to be thrown in there in order to support the notion that he is some right-wing religious zealot. That's the only purpose of that being in there at all. Again, we can look at these reports and we can analyze them going line by line and find so many discrepancies that completely destroy everything in the validity of their reports.
And you know, there was another report, Jeremy, where they said that he had told a neighbor to put metal roofing on his house to help prevent the government from spying on him. Again, just another attempt to try and demonize him and paint him as a right-wing extremist. Because, you know, it comes out of that kind of stereotype they had of it going all the way back to Ruby Ridge and, Mount Carmel. Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Because they were all trying to say, you see, these are the same type of loons that say, look, the black helicopters are coming for you. Of course, this is all intellectually disingenuous. It's just the media playing this game. And, you know, going back to our first episode, we had warned about this type of disingenuous game that the mainstream media plays, because it is quite obvious that they have a radical agenda that they are trying to push. And you can see it from just the way that they're reporting to this, just right down to the sloppy use of quote-unquote anonymous sources. You know, if we ever tried to quote an anonymous source on, say, like an academic paper or in a court document, it would be laughed out of circulation because nobody would take it seriously because it's not credible. Yet the media is allowed to go forward and propagate this stuff and be held to a level of credibility that no one else is allowed to. And it just has me puzzled as to why it is that we allow the media to get away with this.
Well, and here's the other thing, and I want our listeners to understand something right now. By no means are we defending Robert Louis Steer's actions or accused actions. Okay, what we're looking at is we have a man that is accused of doing criminal wrongdoing. Our whole point to this is to expose the media bias and eliminate people's perception of a person, again, having the unalienable right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty, because that's what's happening to him. He may have done these crimes, but until he's proven guilty, he has rights. Period. He could be the worst individual in the world. He could be Ted Kaczynski, or I forget the guy's name that known as the Iceman. It doesn't matter. They still have rights. Criminals still have rights. People don't want to seem to comprehend that or latch on to that. But they would sure as hell do it if the shoe was on the other foot for them. If they were being accused or charged with a crime, they would scream to high heaven, I know my rights. I know my rights. I've heard it. You've heard it. We've witnessed it ourselves, and many of our listeners probably have at the same time witnessed such an act. Now, the thing is, the media needs to be put in their place. I don't care who it is, what outlet, whether it's Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, I don't care if it's NPR or even Alex Jones, although we don't really have to consider him to be media. He's just one of those, off-the-wall kind of guys. But people still absorb this stuff. Folks, you have to be able to decipher what is legitimate and what is nonsensical, fecal. You have to be able to distinguish this stuff.
And that's why we always say that the greatest thing that we can give you is the tools for you to go and dig for yourself. That is all we do. We point out what we see and what we are experiencing, and we invite you to go into it and research what we're saying, and don't just take what we're saying at face value, because what we want is for you to be empowered. That is what the media used to be about, or at least what it was supposed to be about, but it certainly has not been about that for generations now. And it's a major problem that we are encountering here. Jeremy, with respect to the media, I also want to point out that there have been some disturbing things said by the political powers that be with respect to this case. Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, which sounds like Schicklgruber, and if you actually know the history of that, that's Hitler, came out and said that we need to clamp down on so-called radical rhetoric with respect to the abortion issue in the United States. He pointed the finger at social media and talk shows, such as the Wright Flyer, as the source of this so-called wave of domestic terrorism. In other words, the current sitting governor of the state of Colorado not only wants to infringe upon decent, law-abiding citizens' fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms, but also their unalienable right to free speech. Folks, that's something that we must always keep in mind when it comes to those who are seeking to deprive us of our liberties. They never stop with one. They wish to deprive us of even greater liberty. Of course, they always couch their claims for depriving us of our fundamental and unalienable rights in some vague and abstract claim that it is for the security of the nation. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. These governmental hacks have proven that they, in fact, are the ones who pose the greatest threat to the citizens of the United States. The news story, which carried his claims, was put out by the French Associated Press. The French press claimed that American citizens who have claimed that Planned Parenthood has been engaging in these rather dubious deals with fetal body parts are lying. Yet, when one looks at the videos which have surfaced with respect to this, they will find that it isn't the people claiming this. Rather, it has been employees of Planned Parenthood who have freely admitted this. The reason for their claims? They are seeking even more money. Why do they need money? They already receive government funding for services which are unrelated to abortion. However, given their less than trustworthy track record, how can we be certain that they haven't misappropriated government funding for the performance of abortions? It is intellectually disingenuous for the French press, which supports the the French government's ridiculous anti-gun policies, to claim that the American citizens are lying about this. Ultimately, what this all comes down to is an orchestrated effort to redefine terrorism. As Jeremy and I have repeated since the airing of our first episode, the radical and extreme left always engage in a game of semantics. They do so in an attempt to push their agenda without consideration to the detrimental impact that this might have upon the decent, hardworking American citizens. However, you can be certain that their attacks upon your fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms won't end here.
Well, my question is, what kind of validity does the French Associated Press have with saying anything that goes on with the United States? They can't even keep their own country safe. Who are they to point the finger at us and our citizens when they can't even take care of themselves? In fact, I don't think they've ever been able to take care of themselves. It's baffling to me. I mean, this is right out of Nazi Germany propaganda. You know, John Hickenlooper he has to be a devout socialist, an absolute devout socialist. He wants to eliminate the means of people being able to protect their rights, and he wants to silence people. It reminds me of that saying, when people came for this group of individuals, I sat there and said nothing, and they took them away. Then they came for the next group. I sat there and said nothing, and they took them away. Then they came for me, and there was nobody to speak for me. If you eliminate and remove the means of people being able to exercise their rights, but also protect their rights, you have what happened in Russia, China, Nazi Germany, Ukraine, France,
Korea and Vietnam.
Vietnam, every other country where there have been people murdered, exterminated for speaking their mind, for freely speaking and opposing the views of individuals. Now, I don't want anybody to get the sense that this rant I'm going on is driving towards a conspiracy theory, because it's not. But we have to look at history. History has a tendency to repeat itself. If we do not maintain our rights, if we do not even so much as understand them and accept the responsibility and the duty to not only exercise them, but to prevent them from being taken away, we might as well go to the hardware store, buy ourselves some chains, and tie them around our neck, lock them up, our hands and feet, and throw ourselves at the mercy of this tyrannical regime. Any tyrannical regime. Doesn't matter who's in office. Because at that point, people want to say, well, I'm not going to be a slave. Slavery doesn't exist anymore. Wrong. Slavery is alive and well. It's done at the hands of propaganda being administered and perpetuated on the American people by indoctrination and political correctness and yellow journalism, as Randy said. They are brainwashing individuals. When the media and the government work in concert with each other, like they did in Nazi Germany, in China, in Russia, so on and so forth, the people are enslaved because they give up their freedom of thinking for themselves. And they do so under the guise of being afraid to do it. That will enslave anybody quicker than anything else, and it is so shadowy. People don't even realize it's happening. We don't want people to be slaves. We are American citizens, the freest of the free. We need to act like it.
Unfortunately, the problem that we're running into is there has been this concerted effort for generations to besmirch and belittle the national character, heritage, spirit, and above all, identity of the American people. If you look at the way that President Obama was speaking at that climate summit today, he was sitting there apologizing for America. Again, it's like a second apology tour orchestrated by this current so-called President of the United States. Again, he then comes out and says, and this is so laughable that he says this too, but he says that by attending this climate change summit, that is a powerful rebuff and rebuke to the terrorists that carried out the worst attacks on French soil since World War II 2 weeks ago, that attending this stupid summit about a made-up thing where more and more evidence is coming out that it's all just based on doctored evidence that's not true, that has no scientific weight or capacity or meaning, and that somehow is going to make Jihad Johnny quake in his boots? No. You know, pigs will fly before that, and Jihad Johnny would have to hide in his little rat hole and kiss his camel because he'd be so afraid of seeing a pig fly. But that's the thing. Obama is coming out and trying to equate so-called climate change with Islamo-fascist terrorism, and then his own insiders of his administration are then trying to run out and say that these domestic homegrown terrorists are the greatest threat to national security right now. And again, that's just not true. It isn't true. These are false equivalencies they are making, and they expect the American people just to swallow it up. But as you were saying, Jeremy, this all relates and ties back to this propagandistic message following in the edicts of Joseph Goebbels that this mainstream media is doing. And it's laughable the way that they are so disingenuous about it. In fact, I believe it was on CNN. They were already out, the commentators were running out and saying, see, look at what these right-wingers are doing. Their hateful rhetoric pushed it to be this way. And that kind of brings me back to the comments made by President Obama in response to the Colorado Springs shooting. Obama went before the cameras of the salivating mainstream media and once again placed full blame on this shooting on the so-called ready access that Americans have to alleged military-style weapons or the weapons of war. The president went on to contend that Americans have no place in owning these so-called weapons, as he put it. Again, this is raw emotionalism being used to paint our fundamental and unalienable right as some harmful thing. Yet nothing could be further from the truth. The clear and concise language of the Second Amendment makes it quite clear that the right of the people to keep and bear firearms shall not be infringed. It's important to note that the Second Amendment makes no mention of restraints. After all, the language contained within the four corners of the Second Amendment does not say the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed unless it's a military-style weapon or if a president believes that they shouldn't own them. Of course, that's the danger that we have been facing in this country since President Obama assumed the reins of power back in January of 2009. Like any radical utopian socialist, Obama wants nothing more than to fundamentally transform the United States. In order to accomplish this, he needs assurance that the people will not be able to rebuff his unconstitutional attempts to define who we are as a people. Once again, the Second Amendment represents the greatest tool at our disposal to protect any and all of our fundamental and unalienable rights. Our founding fathers had designed the Second Amendment in such a way as to ensure that no government could strip us of this right which was endowed to us by our Creator. Of course, that means absolutely nothing to a potentate like Obama. He hates our ability to think for ourselves and to care for ourselves. And, you know, that goes to your point with the why was the French press even mentioning this when they can't take care of themselves? And, of course, if Obama had his way, we would all be slaves to the government, to tie into what you had just said, Jeremy.
Well, I'm going to read a few points from Joseph Goebbels' Principles of Propaganda, as I so love to do in situations like this. Let's take a look at point number 10. It says, material from enemy propaganda may be utilized in operations when it helps diminish that enemy's prestige or lends support to the propagandist's own objective. Well, what's the material that they're speaking of with this point regarding this shooting? Well, his so-called criminal record. They threw that out there to diminish him, to diminish his prestige, to diminish any credibility, and to further substantiate their claim of mentioning a military-type weapon. Which brings me to, propaganda must label events and people with distinctive phrases or slogans. They must evoke responses which the audience previously possesses, which they've been hammering on this gun control issue for a long time. They must be capable of being easily learned, not hard to do when you have a population that gets their source of information from a defunct journalistic side. They must be utilized again and again, but only in appropriate situations. How many times have we seen shootings like this to where every single time it comes out, we need more gun control, over and over and over. And then they must be boomerang proof. Well, I'm here to tell you individuals listening to this, no matter who you are, it's not boomerang proof, because the Wright flyer and everybody that's included with it, including our listeners, the guests we have on our shows, Randy and myself, we've caught that boomerang and we're throwing it back at them. This is why we do this show. The Wright flyer is the boomerang that they threw out there thinking it won't come back to hit them in the head. Guess what? It's happening. Another point is, propaganda must facilitate the displacement of aggression by specifying the targets for hatred. What are the targets for hatred? They want to further advance the agenda of pro-abortion, national health care, anti-gun legislation. Those things are what they're championing up as the righteous and noble causes. What they hate, the targets of hatred, are individuals who value life as the sanctity and the supreme unalienable right above all rights. The freedom of individuals to not have to be forced into purchasing health care, being able to decide what's best for them and their medical needs instead of the government. And of course, they hate guns. But they want to take all the aggression away from individuals who would stand up and fight against those things and place that aggression with individuals that hate firearms, the people being able to make their own choices for their lives, and people that actually value life. That's where they're displacing all this hatred. It's projection is what it is. All these individuals that say, well, abortion is a woman's choice. It's, it's pro-choice, it's pro-choice. Guess what? You don't value life if you sit there and support abortion. I don't care who you are, what religious belief you have. If you support abortion in any way, shape, or form, other than what could be actually legitimized with the United States Constitution, and believe me, there is one specific way, because a woman's right to life does supersede that of the individual, maybe the child in her womb, that may deprive her of that. She has that right to protect herself. That is the only instance. Not rape, not incest, not because somebody doesn't want her because they're not ready in life to have a child. Those four things right there are nothing but perpetuating murder. And if anybody supports that, you in fact are perpetuating murder. You do not value life. And if you say you do, you are a liar.
Yeah. And, stop and think about it for a moment, folks. If the president were really concerned about what he claims to be the greatest threat to national security in the United States, why is he going to France to talk about the hoax of man-made global warming? It's absolutely asinine that the American people are facing the deprivation of their most sacred of rights while the president gallivants around the world for made-up causes. It shows that these people hold us in the utmost contempt, and that they loathe and despise our freedoms and liberties. Yet, as Jeremy and I have oft-times repeated on past episodes of the Wright Flyer, any and all of our fundamental and unalienable rights are coupled with significant duties and responsibilities. Of course, chief among said duties and responsibilities are the duties to proactively maintain and safeguard these rights. Should we fail to do so, then people like President Obama and Colorado Governor John Schicklgruber will gleefully strip us of our most sacred rights. That, of course, goes against both the spirit and letter of the supreme law of the United States, the United States Constitution. Therefore, folks, we must reiterate just how important it is for you to gain a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution and thereby your fundamental and unalienable rights. Don't take our word for it. Again, I can't stress just how important this is. Research it for yourself. These political hacks make no bones about what their stated agenda is, and there is no denying that what their twisted agenda represents is the complete obliteration of our shared United States Constitution. Think about it, folks. Again, it goes down to how, like, when Bernie Sanders was up there explaining what democratic socialism, communism that he follows is really in line with the Constitution. No, it's not. And it's not a pro-American approach or a pro-American value set, because if you truly love something, you don't run out and say that you want to fundamentally transform it. But that's what people like John Schicklgruber would want to do. They want to fundamentally transform the United States. They want to strip you of your fundamental and unalienable rights to redefine you in the role of peasant or serf. Really, these utopian socialists are nothing short of neo-feudalists. They want to recreate feudalism here in the land of the free. Of course, that is the type of system that we fought against when we fought our War of Independence. The United States of America is a constitutionally endowed representative republic, but you wouldn't know that listening to these news sources, listening to the way that they claim at all times that we're a democracy or that the Constitution is a living document. These are all aspects of these failed policies that these radical extremist left-wingers wish to cram down our throat, and it is well past time that we tell them where to shove it, because we should not give up our fundamental and unalienable rights. We should not give up the United States Constitution, which is based on natural law principles, which are timeless. But you just look at the way that these people time and again hammer away with propaganda and attempt to badmouth anyone who supports the United States Constitution. You know, Jeremy, in their mind, we're the extremists. And you can see that in how they're painting these stories and how they've even tried to make this propaganda stick.
Well, here's another point that I wanted to touch on. Propaganda may be facilitated by leaders with prestige. That French Associated Press article, they're trying to give the French prestige. They're trying to give them credibility as to say that, well, they're outsiders looking in, and they're just kind of, as an outside observation, making their observations. I don't care. They have no authority to dictate or even to point out how the United States citizenry should behave or react. It is not in their purview. It is not under their authority. They have no authority of the United States. Therefore, any false prestige that they want to place on them needs to be destroyed right now. And that's what we plan on doing. Let's talk about some other prestige that was trying to be put on other individuals. One of those articles that we covered on our conversation earlier today, Randy, it talked about a couple of the victims. The one victim, the father that was there, the veteran that was there. Now, again, folks, I want to point out, we're not disparaging the victims in any way, shape, or form. We're not taking away anything from them. What I'm about to say is a sole reflection on the statements that were made by other individuals, and the statements are given a false context in order to represent this propaganda that's put out there. This individual was a father of two, whose two daughters are now orphans, and they live in Texas. Why was this guy spending Thanksgiving in Colorado away from his family? Because one of the witnesses there said that he was happy to be around his friends. Why would he spend Thanksgiving with his friends rather than his two daughters? Now, I don't know what the marital situation was or the home situation of this individual. It could have been a divorce.
Well, I did find in another article, Jeremy, that they said that the woman that he was with at the abortion clinic who got killed was a high school sweetheart that he had met in Waco, my hometown, back in 2004. And again, I hadn't heard any of this from the local media. I hadn't seen this in the local papers. I'd seen no mention of this other than in one story, and I think it was put out again by NBC. And, what's amazing to me is just how much of this, and I don't mean this to downplay what has happened to the victims, because obviously what happened to them is a tragedy. They were deprived of their ultimate fundamental and unalienable right, that being the right to life. But all this background information, like with the Swimsy cop, or whatever his last name was, that university cop, I'll get to him a little bit later, but we have all this background information, but we don't know much about anything with respect to this dear fellow other than what the media has tried to paint of him, which is almost like a two-dimensional straw man used to perpetuate their radical agenda. And in fact, that's exactly what I think that they are trying to do. They are trying to push this radical agenda to redefine the entire scope of this thing to fit their agenda. And, it just walks down the line of the checklist of what the insiders of this Obama regime have been saying for the past 2 weeks, since the entire impetus of the 2016 campaign that's coming up has shifted to terrorism.
Well, that's exactly what I was getting at. Is I believe there was a quote from an individual in the one article that said that this particular father of two, the individual said of him that he would take a bullet for anybody. Now, my thing is, you know, first of all, what does his background have to do with the situation and the events that happened there? And I believe it's just as you said, it's to paint a picture in the mindsets of individuals in the court of public opinion to advance the agenda that this Robert Louis Deere was a radical right-wing extremist that had anti-abortion views, which clearly there was other articles that stated that he'd never even mentioned anything like that. There were people that spoke, you know, not very highly of him, but spoke of him in such an effect that where it wasn't negative. So you have all these different situations, and I think the university officer, which I find it really odd that he was there to begin with, because I've read reports where they actually, the local police department summoned him or called him in for backup. Now, to me, that doesn't speak very highly of the local police department. That tells me that, you know, it's almost like they have a bunch of Barney Fifes running around there and they don't know what they're doing. If they have to resort to a campus security officer, even though they are commissioned under the state as being law enforcement officers, why would you have to go to that resource to handle a situation like this where there's an active shooter situation and the law enforcement officers and pretty much all law enforcement departments are trained in active shooter situations? Why would they have to resort to that resource? What was the purpose of that? Was it because of the location and the locale where he was at, the proximity? I'm not sure. But my thing is, it doesn't really look too highly on that local law enforcement department not being able to do their job effectively. That's just my opinion. So we're seeing all these different things, the backgrounds of these individuals being played up as, oh, they were this, they were that, they did this. I think Nancy Kerrigan even came into the picture somewhere with regarding to that officer about
yeah, because he was a figure skater. You know, he was there to make sure that the terrorists were shivering in their kneecaps there because Nancy Kerrigan said he was such a caring person. You know, again, it's all this irrelevant mumbo-jumbo that the media is attempting to throw out there to obfuscate the truth. And in fact, that is the problem that I have with the mainstream media right now, is the way that they go out and try to obfuscate every story that comes up. And, you know, it's like what Bernie Sanders was trying to say with terrorism. And it's not just Bernie Sanders. Obama went out and repeated this, and maybe we should take this line out too. It's, okay, you want to know what causes gun violence? It's the same thing that causes terrorism, and that is global flattening, obviously. Because every time a penguin explodes and the globe deflates by 0.23 tenths of a degree, that's obviously going to kill us all. And that makes people go insane because of the pressure differential in their head, and then they go shoot people. You know, that is just as lame brain as trying to blame all of this on climate change or global warming. But that's what they try to say is the root cause and impetus behind terrorism. But then, at the same time, they're trying to say that these are homegrown terrorists. So, is this because of climate change? Or is it because they've been preaching climate change? Maybe they should be held accountable for that. Maybe they are part to blame for this. You see, we can apply the same twisted logic to them that they're trying to apply to us. And it's not logic, it's dislogic. It is true dislogic. It is intellectually disingenuous drivel that the mainstream media has been throwing out with respect to this case and with a lot of the other shootings. I mean, I'm surprised they haven't found an inanimate object other than the gun, like the Southern Cross battle flag, to try and pin all of this on. Well, they're trying to pin it on the straw man that they're creating, trying to create this false equivalency that all so-called right-wingers fit this pattern. And yet, if you see the Islamo-fascist terrorist attacks happen, they always rush out and say, it's not all Muslims, it's not all Muslims. Do you ever hear them say that it's not all gun owners that do this? That it's not all proponents of the Second Amendment that do this whenever they think they've got this kowtowed into this way? No. You have, like, what President Coward of the Planned Parenthood there in Colorado Springs was saying, it's hateful rhetoric, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words hurt me even worser. Right-wingers did this to me. No. You are conflating something, twisting something to fit an agenda. And like I've said, all of this story just sticks out as strange to me because it does not, it just seems too convenient. I don't believe in coincidences of this kind of a scale. And Jeremy, I think what we've seen with all of these news media stories is just that, an attempt to push propaganda. Nothing more, nothing less.
Well, and again, going back to Goebbels' principles of propaganda, propaganda, to be effective, must be used, to be perceived, propaganda must evoke the interest of an audience and must be transmitted through an attention-getting medium. If individuals are only getting their information from flipping on the television for a half hour to an hour on any of the alphabet channels, and that's all they see, that's all that their attention is garnered to, then the propaganda is going to be effective to them. People by nature are drawn to things that are morbid. They are drawn to violence. They are drawn to acts of criminal activity because it piques our interest. It's just a natural thing. Okay? Some individuals try to shut that stuff out. You know what? I've always been told, well, you're going to be a negative person if you surround yourself with negativity. Guess what? I've loved negativity. I love watching carnage. I love watching this stuff. You know why? Because it gives me a deeper insight as to what not to do, and a deeper insight as to what people are trying to do to me. When I see this stuff and I see the lies and the play on words and the personifications of things, like adding slogans and phrases to things like right-wing extremists and weapons of war, so on and so forth, that tells me, it sets off a flag in my head. A little light bulb goes off, and then some folks may have the opinion that it's a very dim bulb. I'm not going to debate that with them right now. The point is, something registers with me that doesn't sit right with me. It goes against every fiber of my being of understanding what is going on. I always look at things with a very analytical eye. I love researching things. I'm good at it. I'm very good at it. And many people will tell you. This whole story, like you said, Randy, there's something wrong. There is something rotten in Denmark with this. Absolutely there is. It just doesn't add up.
And like in Holland, you just can't stick a finger in the hole of the dike and prevent it from overflowing. Just look at Rosie O'Donnell. Oh, wait, that's a different kind of dike.
What?
But, yeah, Jeremy, it's not only the extreme left that is playing this stupid game of semantics. Over the weekend, gutless opposition party, or GOP candidate for the office of president, Dr. Ben Carson, hit the Sunday morning talk show route to condemn the attack against the Colorado Springs Planned Parenthood clinic as a quote-unquote hate crime. Now, I don't think it's wrong to condemn the actions of Robert Deere. What he did is an inexcusable deprivation of the fundamental and unalienable right to life of the 3 individuals who were killed, if he in fact did it. And we won't know until the courts actually, convict him of that, as our legal process requires. There is no defending what he did if he did it. But to go to the extreme and call it a quote-unquote hate crime seems out of line to me. As I have stated on numerous previous occasions, America is a nation of laws and not of men. In other words, the laws of the nation are meant to apply to all Americans equally. To claim that a crime should be heightened in its severity of punishment due to the thoughts that one might have when committing one's devious deeds just goes to violate that principle. This plays into the sort of politically correct rhetoric which has been plaguing the United States for decades now. It can be shown that such politically correct behaviors have actually exposed us to a greater risk of harm and danger than we would have been otherwise. Yet none of this seems to matter to old Benny Carson. In my mind, this is more than enough to disqualify the retired neurosurgeon from holding the office of President of the United States. Let's not forget that Carson has come out in support of a national firearms registry and restrictions on firearms purchases in the past. While he claims that he no longer supports such a position, I find it hard to believe that a person can change their tune so drastically and in such a short period of time. You know, it's the same problem that I have with respect to Donald Trump. Trump has held some really extreme left-wing positions in the past. He came out in support of universal health care, which is nothing short of socialized medicine. His sister is a left-wing radical extremist judge whom he has used to procure land via an unlawful taking while claiming that it was under the guise of eminent domain. This is the sort of thing that we should all be wary of. And my concerns don't stop with these two candidates. Ben Carson wasn't the only one going on to the Sunday talk shows to stick his foot in his mouth. Former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckleberry also raced to hog the spotlight in front of the cameras of the salivating mainstream media. Huckleberry contended that what was carried out on Friday morning was an act of domestic terrorism. Now, this plays directly into the talking points and agenda of the Obama regime. They have been begging for an opportunity to demonstrate to the people that America's gun owners should all be lumped in together as a group of maniacal terrorists. After all, the Obama regime has also attempted to paint America's veterans and constitutionalists such as Jeremy and yours truly as terrorists. I want my name to be Jihad Johnny if I am a terrorist, but in fact, regime insiders have gone so far as to claim that we represent the greatest threat to national security. You know, Jeremy, I'm a harmless little dragonfly that flutters around the country. I don't have any harm. I can't cause any harm, but according to President Big Ear Obama, I am a huge threat, and you are too, because we believe in the Constitution. That means that we support slavery, that mosquitoes should be poured into every African child's meal so that he gets malaria and dies. Wait, isn't malaria the name of Obama's daughter? I think it's malaria and Sharia, right? Yeah, I think so. But, well, you know, they just try and paint us as these horrible monsters, which nothing could be further from the truth.
Well, I have a question for Huckleberry. Where is his condemnation of Amanda Blackburn's murder in Indianapolis? You know, the pastor's pregnant wife that was gunned down by two unsavory individuals? Where's his designation of that being a hate crime? I haven't heard of him say anything about it. But why? But this shooting in Colorado Springs, it's a hate crime. Based on what? What is his fundamental logic, so to speak, of basing this as a hate crime?
Well, you did say basing. He does play bass.
Yeah. Well, what he needs to do, like all bass players, is go back to delivering pizzas. Anyways, where is his logic? What is he basing this on? I don't understand it. There was no mention in any of the reports of this guy screaming racial epitaphs or obscenities or slurs. Is it a hate crime because it's purported that he was against abortion. If that's the only substantial evidence that Mike Huckleberry has, that would tell me that he is actually now a fraud of frauds, because if he's saying that being anti-abortion and shooting somebody because you're anti-abortion, you're doing it because you are pro-life as a hate crime, that would tell me that he actually supports abortion. How could that be if he is a pastor of a church or a minister of the cloth, but yet calling this a hate crime? I don't know where he's coming from with that. I don't get it. Maybe he should step off the stage as well, along with Ben Carson and Donald Trump. And let's not forget about dubious Marxist
Oh, yes.
Rubio.
Yes. Who fully supports NSA spying on all of us, as if that somehow would stop anything. Did it stop the Chechnyan Mario brothers from carrying out the Boston Marathon bombing back in 2013? No. But he was trying to point out to the French thing and said, look, it helped stop the terrorists there. Did it? It didn't stop the terrorists. Maybe the French were able to finally capture them after the fact, but they were faced with information overload. And that is part of the problem when you start encroaching upon the fundamental and unalienable rights of the citizenry, and you start to go against the fundamental tenets that are contained within the four corners of our United States Constitution. You only end up with detrimental results that aren't going to do a lick of good for the country, that aren't going to prevent terrorist attacks, and we're going to be left holding this terrible bag with our liberty just collapsing around us. This is the type of fundamental transformation of the country that these extreme utopian socialists like dubious Marco Rubio, dubious Marxist, and, Barack Obama and any of these extreme left-wingers want. And I'm sorry, but the gutless opposition party is falling part to blame for this too, because they have been collaborative with the Obama administration. They have done nothing to help us. And, it's like when I saw Darrell Issa go on the television this morning to openly endorse dubious Marxist, Marco Rubio, I was sitting there thinking, boy, is that not an endorsement of showing just how truly ineffectual Marco would be as president? Because think of everything that Darrell Issa sat over that just went nowhere. Fast and Furious hearings? Remember, he was at the start of the Benghazi hearings, too. He was completely ineffectual. Didn't get anything done. It was all just a dog and pony show, and that's what we would get with Marxist Rubio. But, this is the sort of insanity that we currently face. Instead of, charging out after the real danger and actually naming Islamo-fascist terrorists as the greatest threat to national security, we have a president who has gone full steam ahead with his attempts to label American citizens as terrorists, while what Robert Deere did is an inexcusable criminal act. It does not reach the level of terrorism in my mind. Again, Huckleberry has demonstrated why he is disqualified to hold the office of President of the United States. But, Jeremy, this all helps demonstrate where one old adage is actually false. You've all heard the old statement, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Well, stop and think about it for a moment. A statute is nothing but a document composed of legally binding words. These words can, although not lawfully, attempt to deprive you of your fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms. That's what Obama has been hoping Congress will do. However, since the legislature has not played along with his scheme to deprive the rightful citizens of their right to keep and bear arms, Obama is more determined than ever to use his damned phone and pen to deprive us of our fundamental rights. I can think of some places where he ought to shove that phone and pen, but I don't think it would be polite for me to say it here.
You mean in Michelle Obama's purse next to Family Jewels? Here's the thing. If Mike Huckleberry wants to label things as a hate crime, why doesn't he dig his own family jewels out of somebody else's purse and say, you know what? This administration and everybody that supports it is guilty of a hate crime against the American people. How about that? How about labeling or specifying that the true hate crime that's being waged here is that crime of infringing upon the American citizens' constitutional rights? That's a hate crime. They want to come up with these catchy phrases, hate crimes. You can't say it because it's intolerant and blah, blah, blah. Penguins on the telly exploding because of climate change. You know what? Stop with the labeling. Stop with the mincing of words. You want to play that game? Guess what? I'll play that game with you, and I have a much higher extensive vocabulary than they think I do. I'm very persnickety with things like this.
Well, don't be a stickler.
They want to play games, and they want to do this. Guess what? We are the boomerang. Again, they want their propaganda to be boomerang proof. Not going to happen. We are the boomerang. It's coming back at them, and they're not going to be able to stop it. Every time they bring up an article and they put propaganda like this from CNN, the French Associated Press, Rosie O'Donnell's diary, wherever it comes from, I don't care. I'm going to tear it apart, I'm going to turn it around, and I'm going to use it against them, and I'm going to expose it for what it is. Nothing but frauds, fraudulent statements, lies, and untruths. I will dig to the bottom of it. I don't care. And I might make a suggestion to all of our listeners and passengers. Do the same. Arm yourselves with the intellect of researching this stuff, looking through it, analyzing it. Some people may think it's a waste of time. Well, what's more of a waste of time? Arming yourselves with the ability to see past all the drivel and scrupulous statements that are made that will ultimately be used to take your rights away from you, or having your rights taken from you and not being able to do anything about it. Worse yet, not being willing to do anything about it. Let's weigh it out here. Which is more of a waste of time?
Oh, yeah. And think about it, folks. We have to be more vigilant now than ever to ensure that the government does not attempt to make our fundamental right to keep and bear firearms a scapegoat for the machinations of sociopaths. These utopian socialists and gutless opposition party elitists will stop at nothing to strip sovereignty from the rightful holders of ultimate sovereignty. Again, this is why the rightful holders of ultimate sovereignty must have a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution and your fundamental and unalienable rights. When you lack such an understanding, the radical claims by these wannabe potentates and dictators might seem legitimate. However, nothing could be further from the truth. These agents of tyranny and oppression are masking their true intentions with the aid of the mainstream media. They want you to believe that only insane people own guns, and therefore we should prohibit people from lawfully being able to obtain and own firearms. Again, this is a nefarious attempt to deprive you of your God-given rights. This is the sort of thing that our founding fathers were trying to protect us against when they proposed the United States Constitution and later the Bill of Rights. Furthermore, it falls upon our shoulders to prevent the government from stripping us of our fundamental and unalienable rights. Folks, your rights are in jeopardy as we speak. The president is hell-bent on depriving you of your rights. This is all part of his scheme to fundamentally transform the United States of America. What's worse about it is that the gutless opposition party won't do a blessed thing to prevent his radical deprivation of our shared constitutional rights. I cannot more strenuously stress that you must pay attention to what's happening in our nation right now. We all must be more proactive in safeguarding our liberty. Should we fail to do so, tyrants and despots will have their way, and the United States of America, as we know and love it, will disappear from the face of the earth. And we cannot allow that to happen. We just cannot allow that to happen.
You know, I want to go back to this Vicky Coward, president of Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains. In this article, it says that she went beyond an inference, saying the shooter, quote, was motivated by opposition to safe and legal abortion, unquote. Now, again, what is wrong with that statement? First of all, abortion is murder. Murder is the unlawful taking of a human life. How can you have safe and legal abortion? Safe for who? For who? Certainly not the child that's being ripped from the womb and vacuumed out of the mother's body. It's not safe for the child. But yet the Supreme Court has held that unborn children do in fact possess the tenets of having constitutional rights. So therefore, now the legal issue becomes an illegal one, because to take away that child's life without due process of law is a violation of the Fifth Amendment, which means it's an unlawful act, it is a crime, therefore it is the unlawful taking of a human life, which means it's murder. People like Vicky Coward need to go over to Amsterdam and, I don't know, join Rosie O'Donnell, whatever the case is. I don't care. Leave my country. I don't want people like you here, because you are nothing but a disease and a plague on this country. You are bringing it down with these ill-gotten statements of stupidity, because you believe that, oh, abortion is safe and legal, blah, blah, blah. Wrong. There's no argument that her or anybody else that supports abortion can make against me when it comes to abortion not being murder. Period. That's the way it is. And folks, if you understand how that works, then there's no argument that anybody can make against you. It's all about understanding the Constitution and knowing how your rights work and are to be facilitated and utilized. When you have that truth and you're willing to stand up for it and you're willing to maintain it, nobody will ever be able to take it away from you. Nobody will ever be able to defeat you, and they will do nothing but cower when they see you, because they will be so afraid to even engage you with their stupidity and nonsensical crap that they won't even be able to hold a candle to what you have accomplished. Like Randy said, this is about empowering you with the understanding and the ability to defend yourself, to know your rights, to maintain them, and understand the responsibility and duty that comes along with that.
Because as you know, it's knowledge is power.
Exactly. And when you have that, you will be some of the most powerful individuals that walk the face of this planet. You have to remember, we are United States citizens. In 1776, the world's most powerful military tried to stop us from becoming a nation. They failed. They failed because of the tenets and principles that was understood and empowered and embodied with the colonials, the colonists, and the citizenry, because they understood it. They knew what unalienable rights were. They knew what true equality was, that all men are created equal. People want to take that, oh, everybody's equal. They take it out of context, again, with the labeling and the political correctness garbage that they want to spew out of their mouths. When we allow them to continue to do that, it's just going to keep degrading and degrading and degrading until we are left with no other resort but to do the unthinkable. I don't want to see it come to that. I don't want to see it come to that. Many of you don't want to see it come to that. I know of a couple of people that do, and they just can't wait. But the point is, it may have to come to that. Only if we allow it to get that far.
Right, right. And, it all plays into this. You know how we were talking about these games of semantics and how nothing in this story makes sense. There's something else that I want to point to, because you had mentioned it once, Jeremy, and that is with that police officer who was a university police officer.
Mm-hmm.
Garrett Swayze apparently worked for the campus police for the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs. He had been working for campus police for a period of 6 years. What I don't understand is why a university police officer was responding to the shooting at a Planned Parenthood facility. Was this facility on campus? That could be the only reason I can think of which would legitimately give Officer Swayze jurisdiction over the incident. The media has provided volumes of information with respect to his past. He's originally from Massachusetts and was a former figure skater. Hell, they probably know his favorite color, too. Yet, amidst all of this information about his background and upbringing, there's been no mention of why a university police officer would be responding to a shooting at a Planned Parenthood facility. While my heart goes out to Officer Swayze and his family, I want to know why he was responding to this particular incident. It makes me wonder whether the Planned Parenthood facility was on campus grounds. That in and of itself raises significant and serious questions. Why would this facility be on a college campus? Wouldn't that be considered an impermissible tangling of state funds with a facility which, as the media has pointed out, carries out abortions? Again, there's something about this entire incident which doesn't make a lick of sense to me. It all seems out of place, and there is certainly more to this story than the media has released. Again, this all seems rather convenient for the regime, as it falls in perfect harmony with their radical agenda. Ever since the Paris attacks, they have gone before the media and repeatedly claimed that so-called homegrown domestic terrorists pose the most significant threat to national security in the United States. Now, just a few weeks after the worst attacks on French soil since World War II, they have an incident occur which lines up with their talking points and agenda perfectly. Yet if we are to believe the reports of Mr. Deere's former neighbors and family members, it seems out of place for Deere to have committed these actions based on his deeply held religious beliefs and opposition to abortion. Again, it seems as though they are trying to force a square peg into a round hole. I think we need to learn more about what is actually going on here, and we won't get that information from the mainstream media.
Well, how about this? Since campus police officers are allowed to cross jurisdictional lines and go to active shooter situations, I have a novel idea. Let's take all of our TSA agents and put them on the border to run border patrol. How's that? Let's see if that works. You know, that's the kind of stupidity that creates more problems. Again, you and I both know, Randy, with our backgrounds in criminal justice, again, this is what baffles me. Why would the police department even allow that? Now, if he happened to be off duty, we don't know. That wasn't divulged. If he happened to be on his way to work and was driving by when it happened, that's a plausible scenario, and it could be a justifiable one. But if he was on campus and he was on duty doing his normal patrols, because where I'm at, we do have University of Michigan police patrol in my neighborhood, as well as my community college police patrol in my neighborhood, and they have actually pulled people over. They do have jurisdictional boundaries. But again, this would be something that where the local law enforcement agency would hold jurisdiction over a university police officer. Even though there may be, well, first responder and this, that's not the point. Again, this kind of goes back to the one article that I've read, as well as a couple of articles, where the initial confrontation happened at a bank next door, where there was a potential or attempted robbery of that bank. The alarms were tripped and law enforcement were called. Then he fled to the Planned Parenthood. See, again, we don't know all the facts of the situation. How did he end up there? Was it his agenda and motive to specifically go to that facility and commit these crimes? We don't know. Why? Because all of that has been sealed. Why is it sealed? It doesn't make any sense to me. There's a lot of unknowns here that is going to create all this speculation, and I don't want people to think of us as actually being speculative on this. We're just bringing up the points and raising some questions that I don't think anybody else in the media has been asking.
Yeah, and if you stop and think about it, he was caught up in a 5-hour standoff there. There were 3 people killed, 9 people wounded. Does that sound like a typical mass shooting? Or does that sound like somebody who's holed up after trying to rob a bank or after trying to do a hostage situation? That's what it seems more reminiscent of to me. And again, trying to pass him off as one of these sociopaths that has carried out some of these mass shootings, once again, just doesn't line up with what his personality is, at least from what little bit we've seen. And again, I hate doing this idle speculation, but the media has forced this upon us as they have started to try this guy in the court of public opinion before there's even been an arraignment. This is the type of sloppy journalism that just puts us all at risk, because if they can do it to him, they would do it to each and every one of us. And for what? To push this radical left-wing extremist agenda that they simply cannot seem to divorce themselves from.
Well, history does repeat itself. We have to remember, these very same tactics were used in Nazi Germany. They were used in Russia. They were used in China, Vietnam, Korea, so on and so forth. History does repeat itself. And I think, honestly, they've been paying attention to history and they've been refining these tactics. Let's look at all the shootings that have happened here in the United States over the past 15 years. Every single time they've stepped up even more propaganda, more obfuscation of information that is not even relevant to what's going on. They've increased it. They've always delved into the background of everybody involved and pull up a background. Well, he was a loving, caring this, and he did that, he achieved this. It has nothing to do with the case at hand. That's all obfuscation. And the more I see things like this happen, the more obfuscation there is. And it's like they're just piling it on deep and hard in order to throw the American people off, to paint, again, this picture of a specific individual, to demonize them. And again, he is accused of these crimes. If in fact he was the one that committed the crimes, more than likely he did, you still cannot deprive him of his rights to due process. That is what is being done with being placed in the court of public opinion. You're demonizing him. They did it to George Zimmerman. They did it to Darren Wilson. They did it to the law enforcement officers in New York City with Eric Gardner. They did it to several individuals. They did it to Randy Weaver. They did it to David Koresh. Regardless if you align with him or not, you may think he's a wacko, lunatic, fringe, religious zealot. Fact of the matter is, he can be as far out there as he wants to be. He still has rights. We have rights, and they are going to do everything that they can at every given opportunity to deprive us of those rights, no matter who they are, no matter how much at one point in time, to take them all away at once, or just incrementally, little by little, weeding them away while replacing them with more obfuscation and propaganda. This is their sole agenda. This is what socialists do. The media is in concert with this socialist administration. They have been from day one. In fact, the media has been in concert with them for a long time. Let's go back to Woodrow Wilson and the mud raking, so on and so forth.
Well, hell, let's go back to the start of the Spanish-American War, where William Randolph Hearst made up stories to fan the flames of American passion and public opinion to be in favor of that war. It was all just made up.
And Sedition Act.
Sure. Yellow journalism has been with us for a long, long time. And, Jeremy, this brings me back to what the Colorado governor was saying, and even what Ben Carson has said. They have pointed to social media, saying that talk shows have fanned the flames of rhetoric that caused the shooting. Again, this seems off. You know what it really reminds me of? The Obama regime coming out in the immediate aftermath of the September 11th, 2012 terrorist attack at Benghazi, Libya. From the get-go, the regime sent their talking droid to the Sunday talk shows to place the blame for the attack on a so-called anti-Islamic video. Again, an inanimate object being blamed for the twisted machinations of evil people hell-bent on carrying out their dastardly deeds. Both Carson and Hickenlooper-Schicklgruber were pointing to free speech as the cause of this, as well as growing animosity in the United States. I don't buy this for a second. Why should we give up our fundamental and unalienable rights for the actions of a corrupt and twisted few? In other words, both Carson and Hickenlooper-Schicklgruber are attempting to claim that the United States is a country of men as opposed to laws. Yet, that's diametrically opposed to the fundamental vision that the Founding Fathers had for this country when they drafted the United States Constitution over 2 centuries ago. All of this rhetoric about the people abusing their freedoms comes out of left field. It's like they expect us to all hop onto the train to Crazy Town to support their utopian socialist vision for America. Carson should have avoided that at all costs, yet he failed to do so. Again, this is just another strike against him with respect to his qualification to be President of the United States.
Well, let's take it full tilt. I'm now going to blame my Zippo lighter for me smoking. It's my lighter's fault. I don't want to smoke, but my lighter's just sitting there staring at me. Come on, light one up. You know you want it. It's my lighter's fault that I smoke. You know what? It's my flatware, my spoon, my knife, and my fork, and my dishes that it's my fault that I eat. That I may be, 20 or 30 pounds overweight. It's not my fault. This is the whole point of what they're trying to do. They want to get people to adopt the notion of eliminating personal responsibility. They want to blame everything else. Again, label things with specific phrases and slogans. Why? To remove any and all responsibility of the individual. Because when the individual forfeits and willfully gives up their own personal responsibility, they have no choice but to adopt the responsibility of that being placed on somebody else to take care of them, i.e. the federal government. That is the whole premise behind that. That is exactly what they want to do. That was the premise behind Joseph Goebbels' principles of propaganda, with that specific point of labeling things with slogans and events to erase personal responsibility so that the German people and citizenry would have to defunctly rely on the regime and the Third Reich to take care of them. It is the same thing happening here. We've already seen it with welfare, Social Security, national health care, and these state registries, which again, I still think this has part This is in part of advancing that agenda, because over the past couple of weeks, how many reports have come out that state registries are having a problem getting people registered in the database for national health care? They can't keep up with it. The systems are failing. And again, Vicky Cohort wants to make vile statements regarding, well, this is inhibiting people's access to free health care and legal and safe abortions. She's another mouthpiece. She is a used salesman with a mouthful of samples is what she is. Exactly what she is.
Yeah, and it just goes to show that these people will push an agenda no matter what the cost is, no matter what the detrimental impact will be on the nation as a whole. It's interesting that you mentioned that it's about self-responsibility and taking that away from us. If you stop and think about it, what the Founding Fathers had intended for the American people to be is self-reliant, self-accountable, self-responsible. That goes into the notion of a fundamental and unalienable right being couched with a duty. That duty is the responsibility to take care of yourself, to act in your best interest, because no one can actually act in your best interest better than you yourself. That is the entire reason why the Bill of Rights was included. These fundamental and unalienable rights were endowed to us by our Creator, meaning that no one has the lawful or rightful authority to encroach upon, abridge, or tear those away. Yet, if this man, this dear fellow, is proven to have been guilty of this crime, which he most likely will, then yes, he has deprived the fundamental and unalienable right to life of other individuals. And that is the only way that you can lose your fundamental and unalienable rights. But again, you have to be proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law by a jury of your peers. And folks, that is such an important and integral part of our criminal justice system that we just cannot allow it to be swept under the rug due to this sloppy and disingenuous reporting by the mainstream media. Again, this is why Jeremy and I always say that it is so important for you to gain a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution and thereby your fundamental and unalienable rights. Again, we do this to empower you. Now, with that said, it is time to begin our descent. I'm going to send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. So I also want to take this opportunity to thank you for choosing to fly with us. I invite you to leave comments on our YouTube page, our Facebook page, our Google Plus page. And once again, I'm Randy Wright, your captain, and this has been Jeremy Grapington, my first officer. Thank you for flying with us. We look forward to seeing you again in the near future. We're going to go ahead and start bringing it home now. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen, for flying the Wright Flyer.